Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Innovator Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Williams, and in this week's episode, I was joined by Ben Dunn. Ben is a director of advisory services at Stone & Chalk, but he's also the CEO of Direct2Farms and is a co-founder of both WeTheFounders and the Horizon 1 Investment DAO. Ben is a trained marketing leader with deep expertise in building digital businesses and brands across multiple markets and categories. He specializes in the financial services market and has worked in a variety of roles, ranging from overall business strategies to brand development, customer segmentation, and building artificially intelligent marketing products. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with this week's Ops Innovator, Ben Dunn. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the Ops Innovator Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Great pleasure.
It's quite early. It's 5:35 in the morning, so we'll try to keep the energy up, but we'll see how things go. It is a bright and early start. Look, we're going to talk about working with technology and how people could go about using something like that, using what's out there to maybe take an innovative look into whatever their job might be, right, and how they might leverage those kinds of things. So I'd love to know if you could share with our guests, what was that path like for you in your career to go from wherever you started to kind of becoming the go-to guy for how to use cool technology in your work, or at least how I know you?
My very first job was working for a retail consultancy in Spain, in Madrid. It all sort of kicked off with a summer job where I was just down there for 4 weeks, and the guy didn't really know me very well. And he thought that I was going to take 4 weeks to sort out his receipts. And I sorted that out in about half an hour. And therefore, there wasn't really he wasn't sure what else to give me. But he had these two PCs, these Amstrad PCs. And I'd been messing around with computers a lot at school. And so I started messing around with those. And to cut a very long story short, he then offered me a job for the year out. And then all the way through university, I used to go back to Spain, sort of every holiday I had. And my job was more or less to kind of do what I do now, which is to kind of find technology that the company could find useful. And so one of the things I found one day was DBase 4 was in a kind of a pile of papers. And I started playing around with this on a weekend, and discovered that it could do all sorts of things that I'd been doing with spreadsheets and trying to kind of link stuff. And this is pre-internet. This is 1990. And so since then, I've always had a curiosity around not just kind of technology, but specifically how it can help, how it can be applied in business. So I'm happiest when I'm doing that sort of thing. I can't code. I mean, I programmed in BASIC when I was in my teenage years and, built a variety of things, with that. But what I do is I take stuff that everybody can use. So at the moment, what I'm doing is kind of, building, a whole kind of, product within HubSpot. Because it turns out that there's all sorts of things that HubSpot can do, which I had no idea about. But you come to a piece of software like that with a challenge, where you say, I need to do this. I wonder whether HubSpot could do X. And then you start building from there. So, I mean, all the way through my career, without giving you the very, very long answer, that's basically kind of what I've done when I've been happiest. It's not what I've always been doing, but it's kind of what I tend to gravitate to.
That's really cool, because the curiosity bit, right, or the I wonder what if kind of thing is definitely really important, especially nowadays with all the new technologies that are coming out and all of the new tools and ways they might be able to be used. And I think a lot of people are curious about them, but I don't even know if they would know how to get started with what you're talking about.
Well, I think the good news is that the technology world is moving in their direction, meaning that if you look at something like ChatGPT, the whole point with ChatGPT is that you don't need to know how to code. You can it's built to just kind of, communicate in full sentences. It's not even as complicated as Google to use. So I think what every individual needs to bring to the party, though, is that initial thought that says, I wonder how I could do this, right? Now, I had a thing recently with Excel where we in HubSpot, we have a lot of data on startups, but and one of the pieces of data we have is all of the tech industries that they're in right now. But we have kind of any given startup will have anything from 1 through to like 20 tech types that they think they cover. And therefore what we've been doing in HubSpot is to put it in one single field. So I needed to kind of be able to convert, a long list of words into something which was much more of a table, in order to actually kind of use it for what I needed it for. So I started kind of looking into how to do that, because I thought Excel must be able to do this. And Excel is such an enormous piece of software. There is always a formula for what you needed to do. And I came across this thing called text join within Excel, which did exactly what I wanted to do, right? Now, I had no idea that was possible, but when I went to Google and I Googled the long form sentence of what I wanted to do, up came an Excel community thing that said, what you want to do is this. And because somebody else had come across that before, right? So gone are the days when you can't treat something like Excel in the way that a doctor treats medicine and kind of sit down and rote learn all of the formulae, because that's not productive. What you do need to do is to say, I need to do this. There must be a faster, easier way to do this. And I suspect something like Excel can help me. And then Google it. But that initial kind of trigger that says there must be an easier way is what an individual needs to bring to the party.
When we think about new technologies, the word innovation usually at some point comes up in the conversation. How do you define innovation? What does that word or concept mean to you? And then taking that meaning, how do you apply it in what you do every day?
I don't have a kind of a nice prepackaged academic like definition that I can just trot out. I mean, in a sense, innovation is new ways of doing things. It's a very kind of simple level. But in another way, I think the route to innovation that certainly I've always taken is to question assumptions, and that when any given new technology comes in, it tends, if it's truly disruptive, it will kind of disrupt all sorts of assumptions of the way you work, the way your business works, and that can take many years to work through the system fully. But I think that certainly these days, because of the way that technology is, it's not like, once upon a time, new technology required massive rooms and, huge amounts of investments and stuff like that. It's now something where it's available to everybody. I think one of the kind of the challenges to the 8 billion people on the planet is that anybody, all the 6 billion people with a smartphone now have access to this thing. So what are you going to do? You've got infinite access to expertise. So you could do anything. You could build the next $1 billion product if you wanted. So it's up to you. And so innovation in that sense is very much not everybody's responsibility, but certainly everybody has the potential to be innovative because they can question assumptions using whatever new technology has come out.
I would love to know from your perspective, and especially, given your role not only at Stone and Chalk, but just the exposure to different companies and organizations that you have, what do you think are the biggest operational challenges that you think organizations are facing right now that are preventing them from adopting some of these new emerging technologies to be able to just work better day to day? Are there a few key things you could call out to just say people just need to fix this, and that's just the way it is?
There's one thing that comes to mind, and it's a bit of a kind of a panacea.
Yep.
So I apologize for this in advance, but I think that a lot of industry at the moment, and banking and services, all sorts of things, it's built around the one best way. Frederick Taylor and scientific management was probably the greatest release of value. I think it was like it's estimated that it improved industry by 30%, 30%. It's just astounding. But that approach of the one best way, and which then translated into segmentation in marketing, for instance, where you have segments and you serve those segments, and what you're doing is kind of coming up with a proposition which satisfies the largest number of people within a segment. There's going to be people at the edges that doesn't really kind of satisfy, but they're outliers, and that's the way it is, right? So the message from technology, whether it's about segmentation or whether it's about IT departments and stuff like that, it is becoming increasingly possible to hyper-personalize. And so that can mean everything from, don't treat me like an economy passenger on an aircraft. Treat me as Ben Dunn. Treat me as, know that I am a 6 foot person, and therefore I would appreciate greater legroom. And equally, in the business, maybe I can be trusted with technology more than the next person. So don't apply policies to me if it's not appropriate to me and who I am, right? So I think for me, a lot of what technology allows us to do is to really kind of hyper-personalize all sorts of aspects of a company's work, whether that's from a culture perspective, because you're treating different people in different ways as people, as individuals, or whether it's about the way that you manufacture products, or that you build services around people. It is possible to do that with technology, but I guess it comes back to what I said before about the curiosity. You have to have the ambition. You have to have something that says, I wonder whether we don't have to kind of treat everybody the same. What if we banned the word policy? What would happen? And I think the companies are doing it. So to return to my kind of earlier example of on an economy flight, once upon a time, a flight London to Hong Kong would have 2 movies, and one of them was in Cantonese. And now everybody's got, if they don't have the screen in the back of the seat, they bring their own iPads and they can watch whatever they like. So that's an example. So I think the companies that understand that sort of hyper-personalization will not only kind of win in terms of customers in the market, but they will also win in terms of allowing their people to be the most productive that they can be.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about the hyper-personalization and tailoring policies, right? Because it's not something that gets done very often. And I think it's something really important that those who have that responsibility need to really think about, because it's not something that happens, and it probably needs to happen. And let's start treating our employees the way we treat our customers, and think critically about who can do what. This comes back to the risk conversation. Where can we take smart risk with our people? It's okay to let Ben do this, but you don't necessarily want Scott doing that right now. So it's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at, I've done a couple of jobs in HR, and one of the mantras is to think tasks, not jobs. And if you look at a lot of the way that organizations are structured, it is very monolithic. It's something that, Alfred P. Sloan at General Motors would kind of recognize, that there's these kind of structures, and that everybody has their jobs and their roles and their job descriptions, and that needs to fit within the structure and stuff like that. And there's definitely a place for that. But again, I think COVID introduced the whole kind of concept of remote working and hybrid working. And I think, people are definitely still struggling with that. I'm reading a great book at the moment called The Pathless Path by a guy called Paul Millard. And essentially, what he talks about is that kind of rigidity in the way that we think about jobs. And that he used to work at McKinsey, and then he left, and he's now doing freelance. And he said, it's very noticeable that at McKinsey, if he left at 5:30 p.m., which he did every day, that's what he was told that it was okay to do by HR. But the culture, the people, there was lots of kind of like, good-natured comments about how early he was leaving. He says, now my clients do not care where I work, what hours I work. All they care about is what I deliver. And that's the end, right? And therefore, if I can deliver it in 1 hour working on a Monday morning, and then I spend the rest of the time hiking or mountain biking, that's up to me. As long as that 1 hour has produced whatever they wanted, they're in. So I think all of these things, it is a kind of an attitude of mind, and it's, well, of course we must have a job description. I think that all of those kind of things are going to lead to a lot of changes. And again, this is a bit of a rabbit hole. I can kind of talk about recruitment, because that's my latest kind of bugbear. But I think that we're going to see a lot of kind of changes around volume not being the problem that it is today.
I'm wondering if we're giving any HR people some heart attacks or stress by talking about this, but I love where it's going, right? Because that's exactly the kind of conversations that I want to have on this podcast, right? How can we push the boundaries? How can we think differently about stuff? Nothing's off the table. And if one of the real challenges isn't the fact that I have to go through this process, the real challenge may not be the org structure. It may just be that you've got some policy that everybody in HR is, or technology or whatever, they're all trained by the same system to know what's risky and what's not, to come in and develop these policies that say they have to apply to everyone because there's no other way to do it, is just not really true, is it? There is room to take a look at it and say it. I don't know how you write it. I'm sure there's smarter people out there that can figure out how to document that somewhere, because there's probably a legal requirement to do so, but figure out a way to say it applies here, it doesn't apply there. This is how this approach is going to manifest inside our organization. I just love that. I
think, the Netflix culture, right? That's the oft celebrated Netflix culture. One of the things that I remember when I read that document, and then Patty McCord's book afterwards. And it's in a sense, it kind of, the culture is very, it's almost obvious that you would want people to kind of work that way, right? That you hire people who are at the top of their game, you give them all the autonomy they can deal with, and you just let them, and they're accountable for their results and stuff like that. And apparently it's a similar thing at Google. And then I thought, well, of course it is. Because they're kind of able to afford to pay big salaries for
yeah, absolutely,
the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of the world, right? But unfortunately, most organizations can't deal with that, right? Because they're just not employing people of that caliber. And I'm not necessarily talking about intelligence here or skill sets. But sometimes it is just attitude, right? So I don't think there's a kind of a simple answer that fits all organizations. I think, all organizations have, the larger they are, certainly they have wide variations of talent. And there are some people who can be trusted and don't need to kind of be sort of slotted into a rigid machine, because they can be empowered, and they need to be, and there's other people who very much need a kind of a tab A into slot B type sort of instruction set, right? So I don't think there's a kind of a rule that you can come up with for an organization, unless you're a Netflix, unless you're a Google, right? Where everybody can kind of be trusted in the same way. But I do think there are some people that can be trusted more than others. And I think it's back to my hyper-personalization point is we have a habit of structuring organizations and processes and procedures to fit with the lowest common denominator.
We're getting into the part that I've been excited to get to in this conversation, because I knew you were going to take us there, Ben, and you didn't disappoint. When we think about how companies structure, how they work, their practices and procedures and all the things that happen, where are the areas where it's time to just throw out the rule book, go a little crazy, and start taking a really hard look and just reimagining it? Where would you go if you had all the power to go do that, Ben?
Let's start with recruitment, because that's something that I've been thinking a fair amount about, and I think it's something that's kind of applicable to everybody, right? Everybody wants jobs and stuff like that. So I have 2 children, and I was talking to my wife a couple of months ago about their school, and what that might look like. And I said to her, actually this is pre-GBT, so it's a long time ago. And I said to her, in the future, they are just going to have a list of jobs that they can move to at any time. So all of this stuff that we go through right now, with job applications and stuff like that, that will all be solved, right? Now, it may be that the list of jobs is a barista in a coffee shop or shoveling coal, right? I hope not. But it's either way, it's a very, very different paradigm to imagine that, right? And then recently I did an AI seminar on recruitment. And so I was kind of thinking through the application of ChatGPT for recruitment. And I was doing some research, and I came across a guy on Instagram, actually, who was talking about how you use ChatGPT when you're applying for jobs. And what he was saying was, what you should be doing is kind of, there was a number of stages that you do. And the first stage was that you would upload your CV into ChatGPT and ask it to critique it, right? So that's the first stage. The second stage is to take a job description that you're interested in and to then adapt your CV to match that job description as far as possible. And then the third stage was that it would write a cover letter for that job, right? Based on your CV, based on the job description. And so I thought, well, if it can do that, we're not a million miles away from that paradigm that I described to my wife, right? Because if that's possible now, why? And if you think about recruitment, right? Recruitment does, we have to do things like we have to kind of fit our entire lives into one side of A4. And we do that because some poor recruiter has to go through all of these CVs and compare it to a job description, which has probably been fairly badly written. And therefore it's, 3 parts manager, 1 part Jesus Christ. And try and kind of fit the two together. So as a result, what the recruiter tends to do is that, right, product manager, I'm looking for a product manager. Okay. Have you been doing product management since birth? If not, you're out. And so it means that all of the other kind of experience that you have, we talk about the kind of bringing your authentic self to work. The current processes that we have, like LinkedIn and CVs and all those kind of things, cannot possibly take in everything that you've done. And yet, when we also talk about diversity, in an ideal world, what people are looking for is not people who've been doing product management since birth, but people who've actually had a wide range of experiences, of which product management is one kind, or at least the kind of the kind of skills and capabilities that make a good product manager, you can spot in their background.
You don't necessarily want people who've been doing the same thing for 30 years, because what they did and learned 30 years ago, 20, probably 10, maybe even 5, is useful experience and context, but no real pointer that you can reliably use to tell you what's going to happen in the future, right? Because it's just different. The rules are different. The attitudes are different. Society is different. The culture of the company is different. Everything's different, right? So getting people in that idea of pulling people in and saying, yes, I haven't been a product manager since birth, but I understand what it's like to turn a concept into reality. Doesn't matter what that is, but I know how to do that. I know what the mechanics are of pulling that off. There might be a few things I need to learn, but I know how to do that. And I've done it in some way over here, and I've done that same kind of thing. I've reached that same kind of outcome over here. And I kind of understand product management. I know what the point is. I know a little bit about the industry. That's what you want, because they're going to bring completely new and fresh perspectives and new ways of approaching things, rather than somebody who, well, I learned that in uni, and then I did 3 certifications, and so this is how I do things, and I just get on with it. That's probably not going to benefit any company going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I read somewhere some time ago that physicists are not expected to come up with anything original after the age of 20, because they've been taken down the various kind of pathways of traditional dogma. And so, yeah, I think absolutely you need the people who've got kind of completely different skills and capabilities, which allows them, they're not questioning assumptions sort of deliberately because they don't realize they're doing it. They're just saying, well, I tried this thing over here when I was in HR, and I think it might be useful over here.
All right. I knew that would go by quickly, at least for me. Thanks so much, Ben, for being this week's Ops Innovator. I really appreciate your time, and it was great speaking with you.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Ops Innovator is produced in Sydney, Australia by 10% Labs. Our purpose is to engage thought leaders from all backgrounds, industries, and professions to explore what it takes to be truly innovative in how people and organizations work. From operating models and organizational structures, through policy and process to ways of thinking and working, it's about doing things differently and bringing the future forward to make things better now. The opinions shared by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily represent those of any organizations with whom they may be associated. If you would like to join the conversation as a future guest, or if you'd like to spotlight your startup that is focused on improving how organizations work, visit us at 10percentlabs.com. Until next time, this is Scott Williams encouraging you to keep looking for ways to do things differently so you can do them better.